Welcome back to Epilogues, an unpacking of the weekly Haftorah. You are listening to Rabbi Yaakov Trump. We are going to be focusing on the Haftorah of Parshas Toldos today. The topic is Choseness as an identity or a mission. Our Haftorah is found at the beginning of Sefer Malachi, Perek Aleph Pasuk Aleph, all the way to Perek Beis Pasuk Zayin. It is a short Haftorah, and it is dealing with a number of issues. The primary one being at the beginning is the chosenness of Jacob, of Yaakov over Esav, and then moving into a criticism of the priests or the leaders and the Levium in Beis Hamikdash at the time. A few basic background pieces just to understand what's going on over here. Who was Malachi? So Ibn Ezra, the Rambam in his introduction to the Mishnah, the Radak will say that he was a prophet by the name of Malachi who lived at this time the second Beis Hamikdash. However, the Gemara in the Megillah Tes Vav Aleph, the Targum Yonasan on Malachi, or understand that it could either be Ezra Sofer or perhaps even Mordechai living around the same time as well. This helps us understand why this is so significant. He was one of the shareholders, he was one of the leaders of the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, and he lived at a time when there was a great return to the land of Israel under the second Commonwealth under Persian control, with the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash. He was the last of the prophets, and this is really the closing of all the Nevi'im, is this Sefer. So we should pay careful attention to it, because many of the messages relate to very much to the ideas of today and what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to leave us off with as the last prophecy of time. Until prophecy is reinstituted. The Dad Mikra, quoting Rav Mordechai Zer Kavod, suggests that he lives around 90 years after the first wave of the Aliyah. There were a number of waves of Aliyah where a small amount of Jews came back from Babylon and Persia. Most of them remained in Babylon and Persia, but a significant amount did come to the land of Israel to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. And this is the end of the times of Nehemiah, which is we're talking about, which is really towards the end of everything. This may explain part of the prophecy that we're about to learn together, because he is speaking to a generation who does not seem to know the basics, which is why he takes it upon himself to explain the chosenness of Yaakov over Esav, which seems to be going back to the very primordial idea that comes back to Parshas Toldos, which is our parsha, as to why it is that we are special to a nation or to a people who at this point in time seem to have lost that appreciation. Let's start at the very beginning. The first 5 psukim deal with this prophecy, which is about Israel and Edom. And he describes in the words of Hashem, Ohavti Eschem Omar Hashem, God says He loved you, and the people question, how is it that we know that you love us, Hashem? So the Esav was also a brother as well. So the Hashem says, but I loved Yaakov and Esav I hated. And I made his mountains desolate and his ancestral inheritance to be like a desert. And it goes on to describe it. You can see that I've left, says Hashem, I have left Edom behind, and I have chosen you. Veinechem tirena v'atem tomru yigdal Hashem me'al guvul Yisrael. And you'll see Hashem's elevating the boundary of Israel. So first of all, just a quick thing is, where is it that Edom would live? What area are we talking about geographically? And the area is in Jordan, the country of Jordan, to the south, where the ruins of Petra are today. And this was an area that was originally under the Edomites, the Edomians later, and the Nabateans. And today it is a tourist destination, because there is the only industry it really has is tourism. There's nothing left of that population or that center of culture. And this Haftorah is accurate in terms of that area being a desert and uninhabited. So what is the dialogue over here? What's going on? So it sounds like the Malbim, quoting the Abarbanel, understand that the Jews are questioning Hashem's love for them. They feel that you know what, Abraham was worthy and he was chosen, but what makes Esav, what makes all perhaps the many enemies of the nation of Israel so different? They were also part of that love. And they're really, in a certain sense, they're questioning their identity. They're coming back to the second Beis Hamikdash. They don't have sovereignty. They're paying Persian taxes. There's assimilation which is rife. They don't have their own army. And they say to themselves, like, we don't have a system of government. Are we really so special? Isn't this all over? It was just like, it was a nice experiment, but it's finished. Why should we continue? And this is really the question that Malachi is answering, is that Hashem chose you yourselves. When it says that Edom is rejected and Israel is accepted, what is the proof that he's marshalling? What moment in time is he saying you see that Edom has been rejected? So Abarbanel says it could be in the Bayis Sheni, because already in the Bayis Sheni, both Edom and Israel were destroyed by Babylon, and yet the Edomites never returned. The Israelites did. So the Jews clearly have seen a return from exile, but the Edomites not, and that's the proof that he's marshalling. However, of course, this could be a very keen marshal, a very keen parable to all of Jewish history. We can ask the same things today in our own lives. The exile's been so long, haven't we been rejected? And once again, we're watching the same thing unfold, where out of all the dispersed nations, among all the different cultures, every other subculture became part of the culture that it lived in. And yet, for some reason, somehow, the nation of Israel continues to thrive, continues to survive, continues to flourish and return today as well, which is part of what's being described, which is part of the Choseness. You want to understand Israel's role in the world, you want to understand where God is? Look at history, look at Jewish history. Let's go a little further into the next section, which is Perek Aleph Pasuk Vav to Yudalad. Now we now have a criticism of Hashem upon the Kohanim. Hashem says, look, a child honors their parent, a servant honors their master, but Hashem says, if I'm a father, where's my honor? If I'm a master, where's my fear? Nobody's doing this. So and he turns to the Kohanim, he calls Boizei Shemi, those who disgrace my name. So they are affronted. They say, there's a dialogue. They say, Hashem, how did we disgrace your name? So Hashem responds, Magishim al mizbechi lechem megoal. You brought disgusting bread upon my altar. So they say, they say, what did we do to make it disgusting? So he says, Ba'amarchem shulchan Hashem nivzehu. He says, because you make it disgraceful, disgusting, the table of God, meaning the Mizbeach. You're going to bring a blind korban, a lame korban, a sick korban is not bad. Will you bring this to your governor? Pecha is a Persian word for a Persian governor. Will you bring this to your Persian governor? Would that be all right if you did that as well? And so he goes on to describe them, and he goes on to describe this affronting, and he says, you know what? Around the world, kimi mizrach shemesh va'ad mevo'oi, from the east till the west. Godol shemi bagoyim. My name is great among the nations. Uv'chol makom muktar mugash li shemi u'mincha tahara ki godol shemi bagoyim amar Hashem. The nations respect me, but you're machalel my name by bringing all these things, stolen things, lame things, sick things upon my altar as well. That's what the criticism over here. For a few pieces over here is what is that they are doing. So the first thing is, of course, that they seem to be bringing things on the Mizbeach which are inappropriate to bring upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Mizbeach. But the second piece is that they seem to be denying the issue as well. Denial is usually much worse than even the crime itself, because it shows that there's no reflection, there's no ability to be able to escape this as well. In fact, the Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Nun Aleph Beis, tells us that when it describes these things, it may not even be as egregious as something which is, overtly disgusting, but it could be something which is more sensitive. So the example the Gemara talks about over there is let's say you have Mai Megulim, water which is revealed. Now, what's the problem with water which is revealed? Because in those days, when you would have many more creepy crawlies and all kinds of reptiles and insects around, if you leave water revealed, open overnight, then something could drink out of it and deposit some poison into it. So the practice was not to drink water that was left overnight. Now, this is no longer an issue as much today, but in those days that was a real concern. So the Gemara says, but can you bring such water on the Mizbeach if you are misanein it, you sieve it, you purify that water in a way that it is drinkable, there's no longer a poison concern. The Gemara then says, no, quoting our pasuk, would you bring that to your pecha, to your governor? Meaning, technically speaking, for the proletariat it may be acceptable, but that's not the way you treat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the example the Gemara gives. So it could be even subtle aspects where you think, well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like a friend. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no, that doesn't work like that. That's why Hashem says, if I'm a father, if I'm an Adon, a master, where is my honor? Where is my fear as well? The Gemara Baba Kama talks about this and talks about the idea that you cannot bring something which is stolen. You can't do a mitzvah with it. There's mitzvah ba'avera. The Gemara then quotes our pasuk. So that the Gemara says that just like piseach, something which has got a wound in it, which will render it unable to be used on the mizbeach. So to gazel leis letakanta. That you cannot even fix it. When something is done spiritually wrong with an item, it cannot be brought on mizbeach. So these seem to be even subtleties, but that's what's being criticized over here as well. Now, what does it mean precisely that all the nations respect HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Really? No, the nations don't really do that. So there are three possibilities. The Rashi says, quoting the Midrash Tanchuma in Achremos, that it refers to the Jews around the world. What does it mean? It doesn't refer to the nations of the world. It means look at the Jews around the world who don't have, the Jews in the diaspora who don't have a Beis Mikdash, and yet they all serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yet they all love and serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a true way. And you're here in the Beis Mikdash, and you have all these, you have the ritual and the paraphernalia, and you're look what you're doing. That's the criticism. The Gemara says, Ibn Ezra says no. It refers kipshutai, as in with a simple reading. It refers to the non-Jewish, the non-Jews. So what does it mean? It means to say in their pagan way, in the way that they serve all their pagan deities, they don't cut corners. They don't try to bring things which are subpar. And you look what you're doing. That's the way Ibn Ezra reads this pasuk as well. Has a little bit of trouble reading because it sounds like it's being brought to Hashem. But that's the comparison he says is the way that pagans serve their pagan deities is much better than the way that the nation of Israel is serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Finally, Abarbanel says, no, you know what it is? All the nations really accept the notion of a primal cause, that there is a single power behind everything else, even though they have many, we'll call it deputies, and they'll have the river god and the sun god and so on. They all recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's become evident throughout the course of history, where religions created themselves, like Christianity and Islam got invented, and really behind them is monotheism, and they took up a significant amount of the world population. That generally speaking, Hashem is saying, look, there are many monotheists around, and they believe and they do much better than what you seem to be doing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what's being said over here as well. Now, we finally conclude the Haftorah with section 3, and this is now it seems to be somewhat of a continuation again on the Kohanim and the Leviim. And it talks about leadership in general. He says, if you're not going to do this, Hashem says, if you're not going to give honor to my name, I'm going to send you the curse, and I'm going to curse your blessings. Because you don't pay attention. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is now attacking the Kohanim who are not taking this to heart. He says, he says, "V'zaresi peresh. I'll spread forth dung upon your faces, peresh chageichem, the dung of your celebrations, v'nosa eschem elov, I'll be carried back to you." And at the end of the Haftarah, he closes with this very beautiful pasuk of what it means to be a real leader. Torah semez ha'isabafil, a person who has the Torah of truth in his mouth. And there's no sin or deceit in his lips. B'shalom v'mishar halach itziva rabim heshem yavan. He brings many people away from sin. Kisifsei kohen yishmeru das. The lips of the priest will keep the knowledge, or avatarei yavakshum mipihu, and Torah will be sought from his mouth. Ki malach Hashem tzvakos, because he is the angel of God. It's a really beautiful description of leadership over here as well. What is the curse Hashem is sending against their blessing? How does it relate to their infringement? So the Malbim says, you give Berkas Kohanim, you think you have the ability to bless, I'm going to retract your ability to bless. You think that you have the opportunity of doing that, I'm going to Arisi es Beruchai, I'm going to curse your blessings as well. The Radak says a little bit differently, and he says that my blessing, which allowed you to be part of the Beis Hamikdash, that allowed you to serve the Beis Hamikdash, I'm going to retract that because you're not acting in a way which deserves being a representative, a steward in the Beis Hamikdash as well. Where does this stem from? What is the main underlying criticism over here? The Rambam says in Hilchos Deos Perek Hey, he said a person who is more spiritually inclined, a person who's supposed to be a spiritual leader, is supposed to desist and get less involved in things that are related to material good. And the Rambam says, you should not be stuffing yourself just because there's food in front of you. And he quotes our pasuk, as it says, Peresh al paneichem, I'll spread dung on your face. And they said, what is this referring to? Chachamim said, they make people make their whole lives one big party. All they want to do is move from one party to the next. And he says, and they say, most people who say that party and be merry before tomorrow we die. Those kind of people, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, their tables are as if they're filled with vomit and dung. very powerful description the Rambam says over here. So we're referring to that the basic problem over here comes down to indulgences, comes down to a life of convenience, a life of basic entertainment and indulgence. What is the covenant that Hashem talks about with the Levium over here? This brisi is how you see it, Tom. This refers to the fact that Hashem chose, like as an example, Pinchas. Pinchas is the opportunity of representing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but to do that it requires coming out and doing what's necessary. And what the Gemara Chagiga essentially says when quoting the last pasuk in our Haftorah, Kisif Sekoin Yishmeru Das, V'toyu Vakshum Picha, says the Gemara, Im doime harav lamalach Hashem tzvakos yivakshu Torah piyov im lav al yivakshu Torah piyov. If you act as a spiritual leader, like an angel of God, like a person who's living a spiritual lifestyle, then people can ask you Torah. If not, they shouldn't. If not, then you're not living up to what it means to. You're not just simply an academic who knows a lot of ideas that happen to relate to the corpus of material called Torah. You're a person who lives that. That's what's necessary. And he's talking to the Kohanim and the Levim at the time. Apparently, we're not living up to this as well in this assimilated and complicated lifestyle as well. And we're going to conclude now, but what is the connection between these two things? Why is the chosenness of Yaakov and over Esav, why is that connected to the leadership and the problems that are going on at the time as well? So when we go back to Haftorah of Toldos, Esav sold the birthright to Yaakov, and he says, why do I need this firstborn right? Rashi says, what does the firstborn right mean? Like tachlis, brass tacks, what does it actually mean to have sold the firstborn right? Rashi explains, it means to say service in the Beis HaMikdash. And Esav says, I don't need to have priests who are going to serve the Beis HaMikdash. I can sell this for food. So therefore, in a certain sense, Esav rejected the avodah, but are you accepting it? Are you the Kohen and the Levim? Are you doing what you said you were supposed to do by accepting the Bechorah, which was what you sold? Gideon Weitzman said a very beautiful idea. He says that Esav thought he was special, really, because of his lineage, not because of his actions. He thought, I'm a firstborn, I deserve, and therefore I am. And he was mistaken. And therefore he lost out his bracha as well. Not just his Bechorah, but his bracha in Parshas Toldos. If that's so, then the same is reflected upon Israel. Yaakov Avinu only got the bracha because they worked hard to get it. That means to say that if you don't carry on working hard, you don't deserve it. And that's what's being said over here. Don't think that chosenness is because of your lineage, because of your DNA. There's something more than that. You have to work to deserve it. And that's what the Torah seems to be arguing. And it was argued to the last generation that deserved prophecy, and it's something which obviously resonates for many generations afterwards. Have a wonderful and meaningful day and a beautiful Shabbos.